The disappearance of Nicole VanderHeyden shocked Brown County, becoming one of the most brutal and heartbreaking cases the area had ever seen. What started as a search for a missing woman soon revealed a dark web of secrets and strained relationships. As the investigation progressed, unexpected twists and shocking revelations came to light, revealing a tragic sequence of events. On the afternoon of May 21, 2016, at 4:30 p.m., 35-year-old Douglas Detrie walked into the Ledgeview police station in Brown County, Wisconsin, to report his girlfriend, Nicole VanderHeyden, as missing. Nicole, who was 31, was a teacher by profession, lived with Douglas and their 6-month-old son, Dylan. She also had 2 older children, Michaela and Tyler, from a previous relationship. Douglas explained to the police that Nicole had gone out with friends the night before. He told the police they had been together but got separated during the night. After returning home and finding that she hadn't come back, he assumed she had stayed over at a friend's house. However, by the time he made his way to the police station to file the missing persons report, the police were curious about why Douglas waited until the afternoon to contact them, especially considering Nicole had been out the entire night. His delay in reporting her disappearance raised some questions about the circumstances surrounding Nicole's sudden absence. As the search for Nicole VanderHeyden began, the police learned that earlier that afternoon, before Douglas had even reported her missing, a woman's body had been found in a farm field on Hoffman Road in Bellevue, only about 3 miles from Nicole's home. The police had a hard time identifying the body and couldn't immediately tell if it was Nicole. Her injuries were so bad that they needed dental records to confirm her identity. Sadly, it was Nicole. Nicole's body was found without clothes, except for a pair of socks and a pink wristband. She had been severely beaten and strangled. Authorities saw major injuries to the side of her head. Additionally, there were many scratches and cuts on her back and body. The official cause of death was determined to be strangulation with a ligature and blunt force trauma to the head. As the investigation continued, the police started asking Douglas more questions and conducted a thorough search of his home and car. They also talked to his friends and examined cell phone records closely. A troubling pattern began to emerge that raised more suspicion about Douglas. On May 20th, Nicole and Douglas planned to go out with friends and arranged for a babysitter to look after their child. They wanted to relax and have fun that night. The evening started off well as they went to a bar in Green Bay and then to the Watering Hole for a concert. After the show, they went to the Sardine Can on South Broadway, but Douglas decided to stay at the Watering Hole with his friend Greg. Although Nicole was unhappy that Douglas was not with her, she tried to have a good time with her friends. However, she became more frustrated with Douglas as the night went on, especially because a series of text messages suggested that the dynamics between the two were far more complicated than initially portrayed. Even though Douglas promised to meet her at the Sardine Can, Nicole's patience ran out. At 11:30 p.m., she tried to call Douglas but got no answer. However, when one of their friends reached out to him, Douglas replied right away, which made Nicole even angrier. Feeling frustrated, she decided to leave the bar. After she left, one of her friends tried to convince her to come back, but Nicole said no. Her friends watched as she walked up the street while talking on her phone. Eventually, she turned left at the end of the street. This was the last time her friends saw Nicole. The police reviewed surveillance footage from the Sardine Can after Nicole left and saw Douglas and Greg arrive. Once they got there, they had a few drinks before leaving again. The police needed to find out if Nicole made it home and what happened to her afterward. While searching Nicole's house, they found several items that caught their attention. They discovered a pair of Air Jordans with marks, smudges, and what looked like blood stains. Realizing the importance of the shoes, the authorities took them for DNA testing, especially since Nicole's injuries suggested she had been stomped on while lying down, and the shoe patterns looked similar to her marks. The police also noticed blood stains on the garage floor and inside Nicole's car. This led them to believe that something might have happened to Nicole when she got home, and her body was later moved to a field using her car. 2 days after Nicole's body was found, a neighbor reported discovering items in their yard that might help the investigation. A charging cord, clumps of blonde hair with blood, and bloodstains on the driveway. Further investigation revealed hairpins and pieces of wire found in the yard. Additional evidence, including Nicole's clothing, purse, and cell phone, were found near a highway ramp. This led to Douglas's arrest, with authorities initially planning to charge him with first-degree murder once DNA results came in. However, DNA test results revealed that the blood on Nicole's socks belonged to an unknown male, not Douglas. Additionally, blood tests from Douglas's home and car did not link him to the crime. Nicole's car had remained in the garage during the time in question, and tests on the vehicle, including smudges, showed no signs of blood. The blood found on the garage floor wasn't even human blood, and while one spot on Douglas's shoes tested positive for blood, it didn't match Nicole's. A forensic crime analyst examined the Fitbit app on Douglas's cell phone and found that his Fitbit recorded only 12 steps between 3:10 a.m. and 6:10 a.m. on May 21st. All of this information cleared Douglas as being responsible for Nicole's murder. After Douglas was released from jail, the police were confused and worried that the investigation into Nicole's case might slow. However, their concerns didn't last long, as a new breakthrough in the case came soon after. 3 months after Nicole's body was found, the crime lab told the police that they had extracted enough DNA from one of Nicole's socks to compare it against the national database. They found a match to a man named George Stephen Birch from Virginia. The police learned that George had recently moved to Wisconsin, but they were curious about how he was connected to Nicole. Further investigation revealed that the Green Bay Police Department was looking into George for his possible involvement in another case involving a stolen vehicle. This vehicle had been found on fire and was linked to a hit-and-run that occurred on June 8, 2016. The police questioned George about this incident, but he denied being involved. He said he was at a bar that night and had been texting a woman the whole time. Because of this, the police asked if they could look at the text messages on his phone. George agreed and signed a consent form, allowing the officer to download the information from his phone instead of taking pictures for records. The downloaded data, including details from his cell phone, was then kept in his file. When the officers investigating Nicole's murder learned about this data, they looked at it carefully. They found out that George had an email linked to a Google account. Knowing that Google dashboard data could provide GPS information, the investigators wanted to find out where George was on the night of Nicole's murder. The police used Google dashboard, which combines cell phone tower data, local Wi-Fi hotspots, and GPS data to track George's phone location. After getting this information from Google, they made an important discovery. The data showed that on the night of May 20th, George was first at Richard Cranium's bar, which was only half a mile from the sardine can. He left the bar at 2:30 a.m., and the data then showed he was at Nicole's house. He stayed there for about an hour, from 3:01 a.m. to 3:52 a.m. After that, the data indicated that George went to the farm field, arriving just after 4 a.m., where Nicole's body was later found, and then he moved to the highway off-ramp where Nicole's clothing and belongings were discovered. He got back home at 4:22 a.m. With this strong evidence, George was arrested and charged with first-degree intentional homicide, to which he pleaded not guilty. The prosecution focused on the data from George's cell phone and the Google dashboard, as well as DNA evidence and the Fitbit data from Douglas's device. These pieces of evidence were central to the prosecution's case. During the trial, the jury heard that on the night of May 20th, Nicole left the bar feeling angry and upset after arguing with Douglas. Her friends, who were with her, did not know where she went after she left. Douglas testified about his relationship with Nicole, which started in January 2015. He admitted that while things began well, their relationship had many problems. The jury saw a text message Douglas sent to his mother 10 days before Nicole's murder, where he mentioned thinking about asking Nicole and the kids to move out. Douglas told the court that although Nicole usually didn't drink much, They both drank a lot that night. Evidence showed that after Douglas and Greg left the watering hole, Douglas called Nicole, but it was hard for him to understand. So he asked Greg to talk to her, and Greg tried to get her to tell them where she was so they could pick her up. However, before she could answer, the call suddenly dropped. Douglas tried to call her several times after that, but all his calls went to voicemail. During the trial, it was revealed that after Douglas and Greg couldn't find Nicole near the sardine can, they went inside but didn't see her or their friends. They decided to stay for a few more drinks and spent about an hour there before leaving at 2:15 a.m. Greg then drove Douglas home, and they got there after 2:30 a.m. Douglas asked the babysitter to try to call Nicole, but when she couldn't reach her, both Greg and the babysitter left, leaving Douglas to go to bed. Later, Douglas woke up after 6 a.m. to feed his son. He noticed that Nicole was still missing and didn't answer her calls, so he went back to bed and got up again at 10:30 a.m. Despite trying to contact Nicole and asking her friends, no one knew where she was. Douglas ended up reporting her missing later that afternoon. The court also heard from the officer who first spoke to Douglas, mentioning that he had no visible injuries and was very cooperative. Douglas agreed to let the police search his home without any hesitation. When the police told him they believed the body found was Nicole's, Douglas showed clear signs of distress, crying and breathing heavily. During the trial, the jury saw incriminating evidence that led to George's arrest. This evidence included DNA results and digital information, like George's internet search history, which showed he had looked at many news articles about Nicole's death. The prosecution claimed that George drove Nicole to her home, anticipating they would engage in a sexual activity. When Nicole rejected him, they said George essayed, attacked, and strangled her with a charging cord. According to the prosecution, Nicole tried to run to her house, but George caught her and brutally attacked her in the driveway. They highlighted that Nicole's injuries showed she was slammed to the ground, stomped on, and kicked multiple times. During the trial, the prosecution argued that after attacking Nicole, George took her body to the farm field and threw away her belongings on his way home. They showed photos of George looking relaxed and happy just hours after the murder, as he was seen smiling and fishing with a friend. The medical examiner's testimony was crucial, confirming that Nicole was strangled and beaten to death, with 241 injuries. On the other hand, the defense claimed that Douglas was the real killer, saying he became angry when he saw Nicole having consensual sexual activity with George outside their home. The defense also brought in the babysitter, Dallas Kennedy, who said Douglas mentioned Nicole had only a head injury and wasn't sure where she was. George took the stand and stated that he was innocent, admitting he was with Nicole the night she died but denying any involvement in her murder. He explained that he and Nicole met at Richard Cranium's bar and flirted throughout the evening. After the bar closed around 2:30 a.m., George offered to give Nicole a ride home, and she accepted. During the drive, they continued their conversation and became intimate in the back of his car, with Nicole lying down and him standing by the rear door. He claimed he was unexpectedly attacked and lost consciousness, waking up on the ground with Douglas standing over him holding a gun. George mentioned that at that point, Nicole had already passed away, suggesting that it was Douglas who did that to her. He alleged that Douglas threatened him at gunpoint, forcing him to put Nicole's body in his car and drive to the field to dispose of her. However, George said he managed to overpower Douglas, knocking him down and getting away. He then threw Nicole's belongings out of his car window as he drove home. After both sides gave their closing arguments, the jury went to discuss their verdict. Surprisingly, in just 45 minutes, they asked to see the cord used to strangle Nicole, along with cords from Douglas's garage. This raised concerns for the prosecution, as they feared the jury might be reconsidering George's role and looking at Douglas instead. However, after 3 hours of discussion, the jury returned a guilty verdict for George, convicting him of first-degree intentional homicide. In a place where the death penalty wasn't an option, the harshest punishment was life in prison without parole, which George received. During the sentencing, The judge noted that Nicole VanderHeyden's murder was the most brutal ever seen in Brown County. George appealed his conviction, arguing that his Fourth Amendment rights were violated when the trial judge allowed the use of data from his cell phone. He claimed the initial data extraction went beyond what he had consented to, that keeping the data was unlawful, and that accessing it violated his privacy. George insisted that he only agreed to the extraction of his text messages for another case and didn't expect it to be used in Nicole's case. He also argued that expert testimony was needed to explain evidence from Douglas's Fitbit, and without it, the evidence was unreliable. Despite his arguments, the Supreme Court rejected George's appeal and upheld his conviction. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel for more true crime content. See you next time.